The Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, has expressed worry about the social lives of Americans, describing them as burned out, disconnected, isolated, and starved for time. Murthy has issued a formal advisory to the nation calling for action to address this epidemic. He is hosting events around the country to put people in proximity to one another and speaking about the power of friendship at these events. Murthy encourages people to engage in what he calls the connection exercise and suggests that such exercises can be supplemented by investments in social infrastructure. Shapiro argues that the loneliness epidemic is a real problem and attributes it to the destruction of social institutions over the course of decades, largely by the government. He suggests that the solution lies in a return to community, historically centered around religious institutions. Shapiro then delves into the recent statement by Pope Francis regarding same-sex couples. The Pope's statement has been interpreted as allowing blessings for same-sex couples, but not as a sanctification of same-sex unions. Shapiro argues that the move undermines the traditional teachings of the Catholic Church and could lead to a decline in the Church's influence and relevance. He emphasizes the importance of traditional religion in the American and Western landscape and the need for religious institutions to uphold core principles. The podcast also addresses the declining popularity of President Joe Biden. Shapiro discusses the record-low approval ratings for Biden, particularly among independent voters. He attributes Biden's declining popularity to his perceived shift away from being a moderate alternative to Trump, as well as economic factors such as inflation and supply chain disruptions. Shapiro criticizes the media's attempt to attribute Biden's declining popularity to not being left-wing enough, arguing that the economic impact of foreign policy decisions, such as disruptions in the Red Sea, has a significant impact on people's lives. Shapiro begins by discussing trade lanes and their impact on the global oil market. He highlights the significance of trade lanes such as the Babel-Mandeb Strait, the Suez Canal, and the Tian Straits, and how they can affect oil prices and tank rates. He emphasizes the importance of guaranteeing the freedom of the seas in these areas and the potential consequences of not doing so. Shapiro also mentions the impact of escalating tensions in the Middle East on the global oil market and the need for a strong foreign policy to address these challenges. Shapiro criticizes the Biden administration's foreign policy, particularly its response to the recent attacks in the Middle East. He expresses concern about the administration's delayed action in addressing security threats in the region and the potential economic consequences of its approach. Shapiro argues that a strong foreign policy is essential to safeguarding trade routes and preventing terrorist attacks. Shapiro discusses the potential candidates for the 2024 presidential election, focusing on the Republican primary race. He analyzes the strategies of various contenders, including Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, and Ron DeSantis. Shapiro highlights the challenges faced by the candidates in their efforts to secure the nomination and the dynamics of the Republican primary race. Shapiro addresses the Democratic Party's portrayal of Donald Trump, particularly their comparison of him to Hitler and accusations of authoritarianism. He criticizes the use of such rhetoric and argues that it is not an accurate representation of Trump's policies and actions. Shapiro challenges the notion that Trump is an authoritarian and emphasizes the need for a more nuanced and fact-based approach to political discourse.